welcome to this episode of the Good Take Podcast. Today we have the good fortune of being joined by Howard Beck. He works at Bleacher Report, formerly from the LA Daily News and from the New York Times. It's quite a resume there. Howard, thank you so much for joining us. How is your quarantine in New York, other than the sweltering heat that you just mentioned?
No, my pleasure, guys. Thanks. Hot, humid, sweltering, gross, typical New York summer. Other than that, quarantine's not as bad as it was in March, April, May, when it was, the only time we got outside at all was just to take a walk, get some fresh air, and it was like ridiculously cold and rainy and everything else, and it was really unpleasant to be outside for all of the reasons. But at least now, like, there's restaurants have sidewalk seating, and the streets are kind of back alive again. It kind of at least feels like New York again. And importantly, the infection rate has been below 1% for many, many weeks now. So it feels, we're all still masked up here, and people, I think, are being careful, but New York, I think, has done a pretty good job so that we have almost some semblance of normalcy, other than, of course, the fact that I'm spending my days watching strange NBA games from Orlando, which I am not attending. And it's August and there's NBA, and that will just never feel exactly right. So
speaking of that, how has it been for you to watch things in the bubble? Have you had any FOMO? Like, is it weird to not watch, games with fans? Like, have your eyes gotten used to just the whole concept?
Yeah. FOMO, yes. Not always and not intensely, but it's like little bits here and there. It feels strange first of all, it's the longest I've gone in 23 years without getting on a plane, period. Last flight was coming back from Atlanta. I think it was Atlanta, right before the shutdown. Atlanta and then Boston. That was the Sloan Conference weekend. So Sloan Conference in Boston was the last thing I flew to. And then I haven't been in an NBA arena since, I don't know, say first week of March, probably, like a Knicks or Nets game. And so there was no summer league. I would have, obviously would have covered the playoffs and finals by now. So when I talk about FOMO now, it's about, well, it's not just that I'm not there in this weird environment that they've created to restart the season and hopefully finish the season. It's that this is the longest I've gone without being in an NBA environment at all for 23 years. So it's strange not to be there. I don't miss it in the sense that I really did not want to be locked down for 90 days in the bubble. I didn't want to be, separated from my family that long or have it disrupt a lot of other things. And I wasn't sure, given all the restrictions the NBA was going to understandably put in place to protect everyone, that there would be enough access to make it worthwhile. Now, as it happens, my friends who were in the bubble tell me actually the access has been really good. It exceeded expectations, which I'm glad for. I don't know that would have necessarily changed the calculus for me personally going down, but it's aside from not being at playoff games, coming up playoff games and games in general that I normally would try to attend while working on a story or just to make the rounds, schmooze, whatever. It's also just the fact that it's a lot harder to cover the NBA from a distance. But there are many more of us outside the bubble than there are in, right? There's like 10 print reporters inside the bubble, another, I think maybe 10 from the networks, ESPN and Turner. And so there are literally probably hundreds, and certainly at least 100, 150, 170, something like that, of just the regular beat writers, people who cover teams in every market, national writers like me in a variety of places, all of us who are covering this from the outside. So we've all had to adapt to this reality. And, it's been strange and challenging, but, I think everybody's figuring out a way to still intelligently, thoughtfully cover the league, even if we don't have the kind of face-to-face access and conversations that we're used to having.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about, hearing from reporters who were down there in Orlando in the bubble. What are sort of the most interesting details, maybe the most surprising details that you're hearing, like the biggest differences between being in the bubble versus not? Like, what stands out to you from stuff you're hearing from your fellow reporters?
Well, the main thing is that the reporters who are in the bubble, they're going to practice right now. Every day, teams hold practices. They send out an email with links to everybody who wants to cover that practice, cover in quote marks, right? Cover that practice. So if it's the Toronto Raptors are having a practice day and you want to talk to Kyle Lowry and they're going to put him on Zoom, if you're there, you're in the gym where the Zoom call is actually happening and practically face to face. And if you're not there, you're on the Zoom call. But when that Zoom call ends, much like when what we call a scrum ends in person, right? A bunch of us, all crowding in around a guy during normal times, that's over. That we call it the scrum. Scrum ends, and then you're like, I got one more question I didn't want to ask in front of the group. And so you go back, hey Kyle, you mind if I throw one more thing at you? I just, I've got the story I'm working on. What do you think about XYZ? And you can do that if you're there, and you can't do that if you're on the Zoom call that just ended. So that's like just fundamentally, strategically, or just it just affects the way you do your job. The vast majority of what we do, the best things we do as journalists covering this league, are not happening in press conferences, and they're not happening in scrums, and they're not happening when cameras are on or that anybody's seeing. It's all these side conversations down a hallway, or coming off the practice court, or in the locker room after the scrum is over. It's all these other places, and sometimes it's on the phone and other things too. So that part doesn't necessarily change, but there's a whole routine we have, pregame at NBA games where reporters, scouts, GMs, assistant GMs, coaches, whoever, they're all just schmoozing on the sidelines, before a game, 2 hours beforehand. And that's where you pick up, a lot of things, gossip, rumors, but also just getting a sense of, sometimes you're just trying to feel out some things. I got this idea. I want to see, like, is this legit or not? Is this something that's worth pursuing or not? Or what are you seeing? Or it's an advanced scout and you're saying, hey, where have you been recently? Which teams did you see? What stood out to you? Or, hey, I'm filling out my all defensive team ballot. I've got these 15 guys. Who do you think? Like, it's a lot of that. And so, 99% of what we do, I think, is in person. And relationships are everything. And just the ability to just have these casual conversations, that's everything. So the people who are in the bubble are still getting a certain amount of that. And those of us outside the bubble, there's an extra bar to clear there, where if these guys, they're people you can still call and text, but the job is just so much more productive and efficient when you can see everybody in person on a regular basis.
Nice. So then how do you think then the industry might change a little bit? I know there are certain things that are kind of temporary placeholders, but do you think this industry, that Alex and I are both trying to get our foot into, do you think it's going to change fundamentally? How do you sort of view the next 5 to 10 years? What do you say?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And certainly even from the moment in early March where the league decided, before they shut down, but they realized something, this is big enough concern that we need to start putting a distance in. So they shut the locker rooms. They started doing a social distancing in the press conferences. That's where Rudy Gobert, of course, had his infamous moment touching on the microphones. That was in a right after they instituted all of these social distancing guidelines, so that we could still be where we would normally be, and still have it, still attend the games, still do everything, but not be in the locker rooms and not be close enough to potentially have people get infected. Even at that moment, people were asking, well, what's this going to mean for the future? Is this temporary? Is it permanent? Does it have implications for the future? There are, around the world, it's considered unusual, the whole routine that we have here in the US, where basketball, baseball, football, where reporters are in locker rooms and clubhouses, whereas in, international, soccer and in Europe and elsewhere, they don't do that. So there's some fear that, this could be a turning point or an inflection point where things just change forever. Obviously, it's my hope and the hope of, I can say safely, 99.99999% of my colleagues that doesn't change, but there's just no telling. We'd all like to believe, whether it's this job or whether it's our day-to-day lives, school, air travel, everything. We'd all like to believe that there's going to come a moment in the next 8 to 12 months when treatments have been developed, a vaccine has been developed, people have been able to get that vaccine, and where we come close to wiping out this particular coronavirus, and we will all just return to the way our lives were on March 10th or January 1st, whatever marker you want. But I don't think epidemiologists, public health officials, NBA officials, school superintendents, I don't think anybody can declare that or know that. I do think that if we get to a point where this particular virus has been close to wiped out and where life in general is normal, I have to believe and trust and hope that the NBA, as it has assured us many times, will go back to the routines that we had before, which will mean we still go in locker rooms, pregame and postgame. We still have a lot of in-person access, and we do our jobs the way we've always done it. That access is actually really important for all kinds of reasons that we could get into. But the NBA all along has assured us that these things are temporary. These are temporary measures that are necessary, which we would not disagree with at this moment in time under these very specific circumstances that are affecting obviously the whole world. And that when this all lifts, we should go back to the way we used to do things. So that's still my hope. I would think that, if your question was, where will we be in terms of how the NBA is covered, in, let's say, next April, May, or opening night in 2021, I'm going to say with some level of confidence / optimism that it'll look a lot like what it used to.
Nice. And then sort of looking at the changing world of sports journalism in the bigger picture, you've started the LA Daily News in 1997. You've covered the NBA ever since. We're college students, we're not in the professional game. We're just sort of trying to break into it. So, yeah. That's a very good marker. So how have you noticed the world of sports journalism change in the 23 years you've been covering the NBA?
I mean, we could do an entire podcast just on that, to be honest. So I'll try to keep it short. When I started in 97, the internet was still in its infancy, right? So every story I'm writing is for the newspaper, and the whatever you would consider the scoop of the day, right? Coach is getting fired. If you knew that the coach was getting fired the next day, you'd write a story saying coach is getting fired. You'd send that in. It would go through copy editing processes. It would be laid out on the page. It would go to the printing press, and people would pick up the paper the next morning and go, oh, wow, apparently the coach is getting fired today. And if you had that and your competition didn't, they'd go, oh, crap, I've got to catch up on this story. And of course, by the time they do, maybe the coach has already been fired and they're having a press conference to announce it. That's the way that the news cycle and certainly breaking news worked back then. Now, if the coach is fired in the middle of the day, or, you got it and it was say a radio or TV outlet had it first. Okay, now it's just live, it's going. But the cycle was very much still a 24-hour cycle. That was a newspaper type of cycle, first thing in the morning one day to first thing in the morning the next day. And if you got scooped, you're catching up, and you don't have a chance to even catch up and write about what what you've confirmed or not confirmed or whatever until the next day. You're 24 hours behind. The internet, newspapers all rushed onto the internet in the late 90s. And then they still had to figure out, well, when do we make our writers file for the web versus the newspaper? Because at a certain point in time, they were still trying to preserve the newspaper as the conduit for not just the news, but all the advertising and all the revenue that came with it. This is how newspapers screwed themselves. They rushed onto the internet, threw everything on there for free, totally devalued their longtime actual physical product. Whole other set of podcasts. But it changed our routines. It changed our deadlines. And once newspapers realized we should file to the web first, we are a breaking news, live news organization. We don't wait for the newspaper anymore. But that was a huge shift for newspapers to decide on. Now that changes. Okay. Then the next big one. Twitter comes along in 2007, 8, whatever. People start getting on it in 2009 in force. It takes a few years for it to really take hold, for people to figure out how to use it best and whatever. That has been the single biggest game changer in, I think, media period. I think in all of our lives period, even if you're not in media, even if you're just a consumer of news. Twitter changed everything, because now before it was the newspaper cycle, 24 hours. Then it was, okay, we could be more instantaneous, but it's the time it takes me to type up a whole story, have it edited, and then go on the web. And then it was, oh, no. I've got information and I can tweet it right now, immediately. I don't have to wait for an editor. I don't even have to confirm it. That whole thing you've seen in old newspaper movies or movies about all the President's Men was, get your second source, there is no second source anymore. Twitter obliterated that completely. Now it's whoever can get that one little morsel of information first. You tweet it before anybody else can. If you so much as hesitate, somebody else will beat you to it. And that has been leveraged by people. The people who have that information have absolutely leveraged that to their own benefit, in terms of where that information goes and how it's used. So Twitter has changed things dramatically, but that's just on the news breaking side of things. And I always say, like, this job, journalism in general, whether it's sports, news, whatever, is not just about breaking news. It's not just about scoops or micro scoops. It's about informing the public, educating the public, analyzing, what you see, synthesizing it, explaining it, telling a great story about it. And again, that applies to sports, that applies to city government, it applies to whatever area you might cover. And so Twitter changed a lot of that. It did not change the fundamentals of reporting and writing. I do think that there's been almost too much emphasis in the Twitter age of the scoop, because there's this moment of glory that you get, right? Like, there's this rush if you've got the first to put that information up and a bazillion retweets and everybody's crediting you and all that. And so I saw for a while, especially younger people trying to come into it, were like, well, that's what I want to do. And if they ever asked, not all of them do, but when I'm in conversation, I would try to say, listen, it's fine, but that's not the end goal. The end goal is not Twitter followers. It's not scoops on Twitter. It's not necessarily being first on everything. Reporting and writing intelligently and doing the job of journalism is so much broader than that, that people sometimes, I think, get too caught up in that particular game. And at the expense of, I think, writing. Like, I'm not sure people value the writing as much as they once did. I didn't get into the business because I wanted to break every story. I got into the business because I came up reading certain writers whose work I admired, and I thought they just really told a great story, or were writing about my favorite teams at the time in a way that was entertaining and informative. And I wanted to do that. I wasn't, but people get into it for different reasons, and people, there's now all these micro niches for the kind of reporting you want to do. So you could be just a newsbreaker. That job did not exist once upon a time. Everybody kind of did everything. And, but yeah, that's a long answer, but Twitter has changed everything.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
And it actually leads perfectly, because I'm curious your thoughts on the way the league is sort of covered now. I mean, both Alex and I, we're Warriors fans from the Bay Area, but we get annoyed, as I'm sure other people do, about, the Kendrick Perkins of the world. Like, there's a lot of, propaganda-ish things out there. And, one of the things that sort of bugged us too is, as an example is, the last several years, we heard that because Steph and KD played on the same team, like, oh, now you can't win, an MVP, if you have two superstars. And now this year, LeBron's like one of the favorites. So I'm curious, like, I guess, what would your thoughts be on the MVP? I believe you had Giannis number one. And then also, like, your thoughts on the way the league is just covered in general. So, with the stat aggrandizing, like, what are your, sort of a two-part question, but what are your thoughts on sort of both those things, especially like the way narratives are constructed?
Yeah. I've said before, probably on, a few times on Twitter over the years, like, I hate the fact that narrative has become this like pejorative word, like, it's just a narrative, as if narrative is something like, no, narrative is just a story. It's just like, it is a theme. It's a story. It's a way of contextualizing. I hate that narrative has become this like, throwaway line, just like hater. You can dismiss everything by just like, you're just a hater. Therefore, all of your doesn't matter how well reasoned your argument was, you're invalid because you're a hater. Or it doesn't matter how well constructed your argument was. That's just narrative. Listen. It's the way we process things as people, right? Like, a narrative helps the stats make sense, or helps the arc of somebody's story make sense. It's the way we contextualize and interpret. So the MVP race, listen, every single year it's probably the same collision of basic arguments or kinds of arguments: a statistically based one, an observationally based one that's based on the team's success, one that's based on the individual's success, one that's based on precedent, one that, like, it's all these things. And MVP is in the eye of the beholder. And there are, at this time, 100 voters. There used to be 126 or something. Now there's 100. And every single one of us comes to it with a little bit different way of processing the season and all those performances. That's what makes it interesting. That's why there's worth having a debate. If it were just as simple as creating some, one perfect all-in-one stat that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt who had the best season, well, we could just run the fucking numbers and then there is no debate. Okay, great. Well, what fun is that? And it's fine that we have the all-in-one stats, flawed as some of them may be. And they're useful for various purposes, but they're not all defining. They're not the be all end all. Giannis is the MVP this season because of a few different things. It always starts with the individual excellence, right? I always say individual excellence plus team success. It's got to be both. And the precedent, which I believe in, is there. 35 plus years with Russ as the major exception, where you had to finish top 2, top 3 in your conference. You had to be like a 50 plus win team. You had to be a team that was a clear contender. Almost all the MVPs for the last 30 plus years have been that. So it's not just that the Bucks had the best record, though that helps his case a lot. It is also that he had the individual excellence part to the nth degree. His season was historically great. And it was historically great, even though he averaged whatever it was, 29 minutes a game or something. Like if he played a normal allotment, he would have beaten LeBron in all the basic counting stats or the season averages by an even wider margin. And he beat him in several of those. And LeBron had a couple of them too. But Giannis's minutes were way down because they were blowing teams out so much, which you guys can relate to because once upon a time the Warriors were doing that, and it kind of deflated some of what's
again.
But it deflated some of Steph's stats at that time, right? It happens. So Giannis was historically dominant. He also was the linchpin to the best defense by far in the NBA, and they had the best record. And he doesn't have an Anthony Davis. So you asked about, well, Steph and KD, did they cancel each other out? Yeah, they probably did.
That's what the media told me. So that's why I'm just a little bit, a little bit annoyed. Yeah.
Listen, when we say most valuable, right now, so we're using a construction that grammatically suggests it has to be one person, right? And when you look at a team that has two guys who are both MVP caliber, and in this case had both been MVP, very recently before they became teammates, it's really hard to parse it out. You mentioned earlier, I started at the Daily News in '97. I covered the whole Shaq Kobe era from that point till their end, and Shaq won an MVP. Just one. Kobe's MVP came years later after Shaq was gone. And in the years that they were winning championships or any of those other seasons, it was kind of hard for one to stand out from the other. Now, Shaq had other baggage of missed games and other things that might have depressed his MVP candidacy in given years. But I think there were years where probably both of those guys were on the same ballot. I might have had like Shaq second and Kobe fifth or something. It's impossible to remember what I did back then. But yeah, sometimes it's hard to put it all on one player when you've got two guys who are both top 5 players on the same team. But I have a higher bar for the first slot than the second slot, and higher and third, fourth, fifth, right? It's a 5-slot thing, right? So the record is really important to me, and all that precedent I talked about is really important for the very top slot, and then slightly less so for the second slot. And by the time I get to fifth, I have Chris Paul fifth this year, right? Chris Paul's team, probably not a contender, although who knows this year, everything's crazy. Probably not a contender, but those lower slots I'm using to recognize other things that don't adhere as strictly to the things I laid out for what I believe needs to be there at the top of the ballot. That's my system, right? Everybody's got their own. Shaq and Kobe. Here's the other one actually that's interesting. The Sacramento Kings were one of the Lakers' biggest rivals, obviously, for a span there. They were phenomenal. Loved watching those teams. And Chris Webber, to me, was absolutely the most important player on those teams. But they were perceived to be an ensemble cast. They were great, not just because of Chris Webber, but Vlade and Mike Bibby and Doug Christie, Peja Stojakovic. Like, this was a really good team, and they were also just deeper than the Lakers. Mm-hmm. And they had the best record one year by a long shot, I think. And I can't remember if I actually put Chris Webber at the top or not, but I was really wrestling with it because I thought ideally the MVP, not always, but ideally you'd like it to be the best player on the best team. Again, if it was just that in a formula, well, then you would have no debate. You would just pick the team with the best record, pick their best player, write him in. Again, I don't think anything should be that dogmatic. But Chris Webber had a case. But it was hard, I think, for him to stand out from a team that was considered to be more of an ensemble cast. I think, and I'll wrap up on this note on this one, Giannis's co-star is Chris Middleton, who is absolutely an all-star, but he is not an Anthony Davis level all-star or a Paul George level all-star or a Dwayne Wade next to LeBron James level all-star or a, like, go down the list of all the twosomes and threesomes we've seen of the last 20 years. Middleton's, I'm sorry, he's not at that level. That means that Giannis did that much more, not just statistically, but in their winning, and the winning matters, without having another top 5 type player, and LeBron did have that. So I did factor that in as well. It wasn't the only factor, it was a factor.
Mm-hmm. So now something we were curious about is you're a Bay Area native. You've talked to Steve Kerr about how special it was for you to get to spend more time in the Bay Area when the Warriors were having these playoff runs over the last few years. Sort of what about those times stand out to you?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you listen to that podcast, I mean, there was obviously a couple different things there. One broader and one more specific. The broad piece is that being from the Bay Area, growing up in San Jose, going to school at UC Davis, anything that gets me back to the Bay Area is always welcome. I love living in New York. We've been here for 16 years. I love Brooklyn, and we've been here this long for a reason. Like, we have not tried to move back. We love living here. Still love California too, though, and love the Bay Area and have a lot of friends there and family in Northern California. So anytime I got to come back was always a bonus. And 5 straight Warriors finals for me, people, they're always wondering about media bias, this, all that. It's like, we don't care who wins and who loses. We do selfishly care about where we get to go, or sometimes where we have to go. Some places more welcome than others on the map. So it's about us. Like, yeah, okay, free trips back to the Bay Area, I'll take it every time. When I was living in California, free trips to New York, take it every time. Certain other places on the map that I love to go, it's a few that I don't. But for selfish purposes, that was great. And my parents retired in the early 2000s and moved up to a town called Lincoln, which is near Roseville, which I'm sure, as you guys know, is like 40 minutes outside of Sacramento. So they're way up there. The Kings have not been good enough to get me any, or not enough trips to that part of Northern California. Unfortunately, I wish the Kings would be a little better, so I'd have more excuses to fly on the company dime out there.
On their way, yeah.
But the Warriors have been very good to me. So that was 5 straight years where the Warriors were getting me out there in June for extended periods and multiple trips, because it's the 2-2-1-1-1 format, and that meant between usually games 1 and 2, because that would go Thursday, Sunday. I'd have those 2 off days. I would drive up to Lincoln to go see my folks, and I did it every single time. Every chance I got, that was a free trip to get to go see my parents. My father passed away last July, a year ago. And so that June in the finals, I did not know it at the time, because there was, a lot of things happened in between these two endpoints. But in June, between games, in this case 2 and 3, because it started in the East this time, I flew to Sacramento after game 2, went and saw my parents, hung out, had a nice visit. My dad had a fall a few weeks later. That fall landed him in the hospital. That led to a domino effect of other things. And before I ever got a chance to get back out there, he was gone. So literally the last chance I got to see my dad was because the Warriors were in the finals. It's such a strange way to think about it, because the job can take you from family a lot, especially, my wife and daughter, who had to put up with all my travel when I was covering the Knicks still. And even now I don't travel as much as I used to, but it quite literally enabled me to see my dad at a time that I wouldn't have otherwise. If the Warriors weren't in the finals that year, if it was Rockets Raptors, I would have been bouncing between Houston and Toronto. Series would have ended. My dad presumably would have had that same fall, the same set of circumstances, right? And I wouldn't have had that June visit. Like I literally got to see him as close as I did to the end because of that. It was when I had Steve on the podcast last September, and that was 6 weeks after, I think. And so, yeah, I just kind of mentioned and, thanked him, like, thank you guys for being so dominant that you got me out here all these Junes and got me these free visits with my parents. The basketball gods work in mysterious ways.
Absolutely. So speaking of basketball gods, how might they exercise their powers in the next couple of months? We're understanding how things are all wacky and weird. I was also going to ask you why you think the Bucks aren't getting a ton of respect. I mean, it seems like, again, they're historically great, but it seems like people are sort of looking for an excuse to pick the Raptors or maybe the Celtics. How do you see the playoffs shaping out, and who's your title pick?
I mean, it's such a weird thing because there's no reason to believe anything other than the usual NBA axiom of talent wins. The best talent wins, period. Like, you're not going to find too many years where the champion was not the team that you either expected or thought plausibly was in contention, was in the conversation preseason, or at least by midseason, you could see it coming, right? There are very rarely surprises in the NBA when it comes to May and June. The occasional upset, the occasional we believe Warriors, right? The occasional 8-seeded Knicks making a run in '99 to the finals. It happens, but upsets are rare. Talent wins. Talent rules. We don't know what the bubble will do to that axiom. We don't know what the lack of home court and the lack of travel and the lack of fans and all these other things will do. To date, we have no reason to believe that the virus will cause some weird, jagged direction for the postseason, but that's possible still. Injuries, certainly possible, and we've already seen a ton in the first week or so here, week and a half of seeding games. So the teams that were discussed before that were the clear favorites in March should still be the favorites now. However, the Lakers and Clippers have both been kind of lackluster for the most part in the seeding games, which means that people are kind of starting to wonder a little. The confidence level has decreased. I think these are glorified exhibition games. I don't think they're definitive. Doesn't mean you can dismiss them entirely either, though. And the Bucks are a different case entirely. The Bucks, best record all season, reigning MVP, who will probably repeat as MVP, best defense in the NBA, really good supporting cast, big distance between them and the other teams in the standings in the East. And I think, if anything, I would say it's the opposite of what you were suggesting about people doubting them. I think more than anything, people just kind of assumed they were coming out of the East. But once we start discussing the NBA, there's, as vigorously again with these games going on, and people start to see, oh, you know what, Toronto looks really good right now, and oh my God, yeah, Boston, yeah, when they're healthy and Kemba's knee is okay, they're really deep. I think it's also natural to say, well, okay, but what are the possible counterfactuals? Where else could this go? I've been one who all season has said the Bucks are legitimately the favorite and they're great, but I'm not sold on the idea that they were a lock. I've been saying Toronto and Boston should be considered the whole time. And at times I've said Philly and Miami should be in that conversation too. Philly falling out of it without Ben Simmons, I would say. Miami, again, they've been a little weird in the bubble. Jimmy's missed a bunch of games. Dragic missed some games. I think it's a race in the East. I think it's a 3 to 4 team race in the East, legitimately. And I will still say it's a 2-team LA race in the West. But the Clippers have a lot of work to do, and they need to get Montrezl Harrell back. The Lakers have some work to do. But I just think, when it comes right down to it, trying to knock off LeBron and AD together, trying to knock off Kawhi and Paul George together, good luck.
Mm-hmm. Now, one thing we had to ask you about, one of our favorite pieces that you've ever done, the oral history of the Kobe to Shaq lob in the conference finals against Portland in 2000. But we both really liked that piece. What was it like to go back and revisit that whole thing, especially in light of Kobe's passing?
Yeah, no, thanks. Appreciate it. I loved doing that story. It was one I'd wanted to do for years. I covered that series and that game. You know, it's the 2000 conference finals, Lakers in Portland, game 7, Lakers down 15 in the fourth quarter, and by all rights should have lost that game. And if they lose that game, there is no dynasty probably. Maybe they only win 1 or 2, but not 3 in a row. And besides that, if you lose that game, the consequences might have been a roster blow up. And, if the Blazers win that, their roster does not get screwed up, which it did after that game and after that series. Everything is different if it changes. But also, it's rare that you can look at a dynasty, probably in any sport, but certainly in the NBA, whether it's that Laker dynasty, other Laker dynasties, Celtics dynasties, the Warriors dynasty, whichever one you want to point to, and say that was the moment. Like that was it right there. It is reminiscent of the photo that's sitting over your shoulder, Alex, of the catch. Because which is like I've said many times, you guys might know, like that is the seminal moment for me because I was 13 years old when that happened. And that was like the moment for me as a young sports fan who was just starting. Like I wasn't hardcore I wasn't like reading the paper every day. I wasn't watching every game. That was the moment that sealed it all for me. And the Niners go on to win that Super Bowl. They become the dynasty of the 80s. And from that moment on, I'm devouring the Sounds of Mercury News sports section every morning. That is literally the moment that not only launched that Niners dynasty, but launched my sports passion that led to me deciding I want to write about sports for a living. My entire career goes back to that catch that is sitting over your shoulder on your bookshelf. The lob from Kobe to Shaq, I even realized it at the time. Like maybe it was the next morning after I got off deadline and got my head clear and whatever and figured out what I was doing to get to the finals and all that. But it hit me at the time that for a generation of young fans, that was going to be like the catch was for me. Like this incredible, thrilling, amazing moment that you couldn't see coming, that wasn't scripted, that just happened spontaneously. Kobe to Shaq for this lob. And it seals that game and that series, and it launches the Laker dynasty. It is the formative moment of that dynasty. So maybe because of the resonance and the kind of the symmetry with that and the catch, maybe that's why I always had to come back to it. But it was also, look, I wish I could have done it when I first wanted to a few years ago while Kobe was still alive. It was incomplete without him. Fortunately, he had given an interview that was on a documentary that the Spectrum Sportsnet down in LA had done. So I was able to use some of those quotes in my piece, but it was great getting to just, I had never gotten in all these years, I don't think I'd ever talked about that game again after that day with Shaq or Robert Horry or Derek Fisher, Rick Fox, all the Trailblazers who I got to talk to for that game or for the follow-up story or for the oral history. Scottie Pippen, Bonzi Wells, Steve Smith, Damon Stoudemire, all these guys were great. Mike Dunleavy. It was just fun to revisit because of how impactful that game was, how memorable it was for me as a reporter covering it. I don't think I'd ever done that before, where I'd gone and revisited a very specific moment that wasn't just meaningful for the teams, but for me as well. That was the first championship run I'd covered, my third year on the beat. So yeah, it was like, that was a really fun trip down memory lane.
Nice. Howard, we really appreciate you joining us. This last question, is there anything that you want to plug, anything that you have going on, any like vlogs or I don't know, whatever you want.
Projects you want to talk about.
Yeah.
No, nothing specific. I'm working on a couple stories that I hope to get out soon. I'm always too superstitious to talk about them before they appear, so I'll withhold. But a couple things coming, at least one next week, I hope. Podcast, the full 48, of course, you can find on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all the other good places. Spoke to my former Times colleague, Bill Rhoden, earlier this week to just talk about the impact or maybe lack thereof of all of the NBA players' demonstrations, whether it's kneeling, whether it's the shirts, the Black Lives Matter on the court, what does it accomplish or not accomplish? What should be next? Bill has been writing about these issues for longer than I've been alive. So he was great to talk to about that. That was a really fun conversation. And I'll probably record another episode on Thursday of this week. have not figured out where that one will go yet. But yeah, appreciate that. And appreciate the conversation, guys. Great questions. This has been fun. Always great to connect with fellow Bay Area guys. Well, I can't say fellow Niners fan because I'm no longer a fan. It's part of the that's what happens when you become a professional sports writer. It's a casualty of the job. But that photo still means a lot to me. So
you mean you won't cheer when they win the Super Bowl next year? You won't cheer?
I might give them a golf clap.
Okay.
I might, it is Pavlovian. I will say this: the last time they were in the Super Bowl when they lost, I basically, like, at the end of the game, I went, yeah, it's too bad. Whereas when I was like 16, that would have destroyed me for days, weeks. I think I just would have been crushed. And now it's like, And then I thought, you know what? That's not my Niners. My Niners are still undefeated in the Super Bowl. This is some other generation's Niners. It has no relevance to me.
It's our problem. Okay.
That's your problem. The joys of completely cutting off your fandom and having no emotional ties to any team or player is that you don't get the highs and the joys of all that true, which is the point of fandom, but you don't have to deal with any of the grave disappointments either. So it is weird though. When I see the uniform, there is still something that, like, oh, okay, what do they do? Oh, they're good this year. Oh, okay. But I've long since kind of cut myself off.
Look, back in February on the night we shared a very angry phone call. Hopefully,
why did we run the ball?
Yeah, exactly. Why didn't they run the ball this time? And hopefully someday we'll be able to step back, have that just those sort of more objective conversations when our teams are in those moments. So
yeah, absolutely. I look forward to you guys making that jump. And seeing you out doing this someday. And stay in touch.
Absolutely. And we hope to see you down the road once things are the world is normal once again. So
we will get there.
So.
I'm confident.
Thank you so much, Howard. Really, really appreciate your time.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
You too.
Be sure to check out Good Take with Alex Hutton and Zevin Schuster on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else podcasts are available.
And be sure to follow us on Twitter at AlexHutton35. That's Alex Hutton, Hutton 35, and at ZShust9. That's ZSHUST9. And please follow us, spread our work, and we hope to see you back here again soon. Thanks so much.
Now back to the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this episode of the Good Take podcast. That was a really fun conversation with Howard. I really enjoyed getting to talk to someone from the industry. It was really a good conversation. Do you have any takeaways, any thoughts, Alex? Anything stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I just appreciated sort of how in depth he was with his answers. He's very methodical. He thinks about his words carefully. He wants to give like really, really clear answers without devolving into hot takes or sort of over the top of his head. He really wants to think things over, make sure he backs up his points, and it's always good to hear from someone who kind of takes that angle. So
you mean you don't like oh my God, LeBron's a choker, Skip Bayless, like, oh my God, like all screaming that is blasphemous, crazy, asinine, acetane.
I know. You've known me for 16 years, and it's not like I ever would want to go that way. But no. I prefer the sort of the methodical, rational thought over the craziness. And that's what we're trying to do with this podcast, really.
Absolutely. So speaking of that, it's a nice segue there for sure. How would you methodically digest and dissect the news that we've heard from college football in the last half an hour? We wanted to, talk for all of our many listeners, for all you guys who wanted to just talk a little bit about. I mean, the Pac-12 and the Big Ten canceling their fall seasons is huge news. So first, what are your thoughts on that? But before we get into our final segment, we wanted to really discuss the ramifications that this is going to have on many things.
Yeah. We're recording this on Tuesday, and by the time the sound comes out, I'm sure there'll be tons of new information, tons of things will change because the way things move these days, everything happens so fast. But we did want to talk about it because while we were recording this, the news broke the Big Ten and the Pac-12 were postponing their seasons. So, I mean, it just feels like a sort of a landmark watershed moment for college sports in a lot of ways. That everything that has come out with the players saying, we want to play, but we want to play under these conditions. We want these demands to be met. And then and then for the NCAA to start to threaten to cancel the season as soon as all that stuff happens is just the most NCAA thing ever to me. To want to cancel the season instead of meet the demands of their players who currently don't get paid. I mean, it just feels so on brand for them and not in a good way. And
they're not treating them like employees, which is what they are.
Right, exactly. I mean, I've maintained for years that NCAA athletes are should be considered employees and should get paid at least some amount for the work they do, because there, with so many billions of dollars going around in college sports, for the athletes to never see a penny of it is just, I think, so unfair and so ridiculous to me that this moment, I really would never want a global pandemic to be the thing that triggers this, but for it to happen is, I hope that in some way this leads us farther down the right path of these guys eventually getting paid for what they do.
How would you do it, I guess? How would you go about paying the players? Would you just get like, oh, it's capitalist, whoever gets money off the name and likeness, fine? Like, how would you?
I think that's some of it. I think another portion of it will be redistributing the money that the schools take in and that the NCAA takes in, and making sure that there's some kind of contract in which the players get a cut of that and it gets distributed evenly, because I mean, the backup offensive lineman on the worst D1 football team maybe shouldn't get the same amount as Trevor Lawrence, but they still that person's still putting in tons of work and making money for their school and not getting any of it. So that's not fair either. So they do need, I think there has to be some way to make sure that every athlete gets at least something, and then by redistributing the money, and then the name, image, likeness part can sort of determine how much each person gets,
Listen, man, if somebody played a video game with the video game version of Zevin Schuster, I would want some royalties on that for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, obviously colleges don't have the resources that the pros have, and so I mean, for them to test that many people, I mean, their football teams and basketball teams already have more people on it, plus all the other sports. I mean, there's
right.
it's not even conceivable. I mean, to keep running all their sports. I mean, we've seen Stanford just cut 11 of its schools, and they're like probably the most. I mean, they win the Capital One Cup or whatever it's called every year. I mean, they're as their sports and their whole school, they're as tight and as well run as possible. So like when they have to cut back, it really, I mean, that really to me spells doom for a lot of people.
Yeah, no question. And the other thing about NCAA sports is they can't be played in a bubble. There's just too many athletes and too many teams, and it's just too hard
classes. Like it just
right, exactly. And you mean
not everyone wants to go to Zoom University, obviously.
No, of course not. And no, but I mean, I think it's incredibly reasonable to say like, hey, we're just like the pros here in that we are risking our health in a lot of ways for the entertainment of the American public. Why are we not being treated like that? Why are we not being paid like the pro athletes are to do the same thing?
Because they're amateurs, Alex. They're amateurs.
I mean, there was a book that came out that was written by someone who used to work for the NCAA who said they very specifically used the term student athlete to frame them as amateurs and sort of shift the public opinion of, oh, they're not employees, they're student athletes, and they can't get paid because of that. And it's just, I mean,
very slick and slimy, no question.
Yep. No, I mean, the language of the NCAA uses always, they're not employees, they're student athletes. I mean, you'll hear that exact phrase all the time. And they frame it as it's this ridiculous thing to try to convert a student athlete into an employee. But like so many parts of a college, the students get paid. There's so many different on-campus jobs that students can get. But then the athletes who bring in so much money for the school, for them not get paid, but the kid who works a shift at the campus dining hall, the fact that he gets paid, that just doesn't add up.
Do you remember Shabazz Napier after Connecticut won the NCAA tournament? He was like, "Yeah, I didn't have enough food to eat." You remember that?
Yep.
Yeah, that's insane. That's crazy.
Yeah, I know.
Especially when you see the amount that all these coaches are being paid. I mean, it's crazy.
Exactly.
Plus, I mean, the whole student. I mean, look, I'm sure the overwhelming. I mean, 99% of these athletes aren't going to go pro, and so I'm sure they go to class and they're well behaved and all the type of stuff. But for the ones that are making the most money, like let's say a Trevor Lawrence, do you really think he's getting up at 8 a.m. like, oh, I'm really going to go and try and make it to Trinsian economics. Like, no, like maybe Trevor Lawrence is, but most athletes who are going to go pro and make money just aren't going to do that. So the ones that the NCAA are actually most concerned about, not getting paid, trying to keep their classifications down as student athletes, the ones that are the most profitable, those are actually the ones, the 1% or the less than 1% from each school. That doesn't need to go to class because, again, right or wrong, but they're the ones that it doesn't really matter for. So to me, they're actually sort of harming, I think, the rest of them, because they're putting these guys who make a bunch of money in the same class as, like you said, the backup offensive lineman, which I don't even think is fair.
Mm-hmm. I know. I mean, I totally agree, and there just needs to be a better way in place. It's just gotten to a point where they're so close to being professional athletes, where, athletics is such a huge part of their life. You hear things from so many college athletes about how busy their schedule is and how much it revolves around their athletic schedule so much more than their academic schedule. Even though they always put student ahead of athlete in
well, there's the morning workout, then there's the afternoon, then there's practice. There's constant
and film sessions and weightlifting. And
how high up on your bucket list would changing up the NCAA rules be?
That's a fantastic segue. If I were in charge,
there you go.
Call back to a previous episode. If I were in charge, that's something I would institute so fast. I would talk to people who've done research on this, and we'd 100% collaborate on some kind of plan to get the revenue into the pockets of the people who make it. Should the coaches get paid something? Yes. Should even the best coaches be making the $6 to $10 million a year? No. The coaches can make a little less, and then the players can get some of that.
Honestly, I don't care how much the coaches make, as long as the players who are allowed to make money, to be honest, or as long as they get some portion of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I get them. Because they're who do you go to a game to see? You go to see the players. You don't go to see.
I don't know, man. I really like that outside linebackers coach, man. I don't know. I really enjoy the offensive line coach.
I know. That's my favorite part. No, but
yeah,
you're going to see the players. That's what you're paying your ticket for. That's who's, even if their name isn't on the back of the jersey, that's whose jersey you're buying. And then the fact that they're not seeing the money that they're creating, it just stinks for them. And it's something I want to see. I want to see change. And if you've seen the legislation recently getting passed, and all that kind of stuff, in different things to I think the goal of that is try to take it to the Supreme Court, things like that, and get a ruling.
Obviously, Gavin Newsom signed the thing on LeBron's show.
Yeah,
exactly. Sometime recently. Last year seems like 10 years ago. But anyway, we wanted to. You mentioned
2019, so
yeah. 2019 seems like 1919.
I know.
Sorry. So speaking of a bucket list, you mentioned it was a good segue.
Yeah.
Maybe done on purpose, possibly. We had a segment that we wanted to call "Bucket Up," not to be confused with the F word that has the "mammon up." Bucket up. So in this segment, we're each going to say one sports item that we've already checked off of our bucket list, and then one more that we are going to that we hope we are going to one day check off as well. So we'll start off with the already done, and then Alex will say his, I'll say mine, and then we'll go into our wish or our hope for the future. So first off, Alex, what is your item that you have checked off your bucket list that you, at least the one that you're most proud of so far?
Okay, yeah, for sure. So this was in 2017. For a long time, I wanted to rush the field after a college football game. It was something I'd want to do because you see it on TV all the time after big wins or upsets or whatever, and it looks like such a good time. And something I wanted to do for a while. And then in 2017, it was my freshman year of college. I was coming back home over a long weekend, and Cal had a home game at night, and I got to sit in the student section thanks to our good friend Varun Kamat, who goes to Cal and who we'll definitely have on the show at some point, I think. So we went to the game together, sat in the student section. Cal was playing Washington State that night. Washington State was like number 8 in the country, I think, for that game. And Cal just like crushed Washington State. I mean, it was unbelievable. Like, I think they forced like 7 or 8 turnovers, and there was one play, I'm sure a lot of you have seen it, where Cal's quarterback ran for a touchdown, did a flip into the end zone because he tried to dive, and like the Washington State defender kind of undercut him, and he flipped into the end zone and almost stuck the landing. Very close, but it was still like one of the, I think, the play of the weekend, kind of stuff. And the final score was like 37-3 or something like that. I mean, Cal just destroyed them. And with like a minute left or something, everyone in the student section just started chanting, "Rush the field, rush the field." And like as the clock was going down, we all started like squeezing our way up towards the like the stairs. There's like a stair area right near the student section where you can run on. And initially the security guards were like trying to stop us, but eventually they just said, "Forget it and go." And like, so we all just like started, some people tried to like jump off the like the ledge and get down, and like a few people like kind of wiped out trying to do that. But me and Varun, we like just kept going down the stairs. Like there were like a ton of people kind of just jockeying for position, and we all eventually got down there and ran around in the field and celebrated the upset win. So that was really exciting.
Did the field goal posts survive or no?
They had security guards like standing around the end zone and standing around the post and everything.
Okay.
They were prepared for it. So
nice. Okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna say mine's pretty simple, but for me, honestly, I mean, it's been checked off a few times now, but for me, it was honestly just the Warriors winning title. I was thinking, gosh, I mean, I've been to Fenway, Yankee Stadium; those are up there, but I also don't like to admit things to rival teams. That's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been to Olympic trials, but there's nothing like actually it was pole vaulting actually, which is pretty damn cool. Pole vaulting and like the jump over the bar. But there's nothing like your team winning a title. And again, the fact that it was just so unexpected to me was just made it that much better. I mean, that's the thing that people don't understand about the Warriors. And I get everyone hates us now, but to me, the Warriors should be like a total success story, kind of like a Steve Jobs or like a LeBron James, who came from nothing and then just became this just global dominant entity. So I'll never forget like the night that the Warriors won in 2015. My dad and I think when my friend Matthew, I think we tried to drive to Oakland to try and go to some. There was a bunch of partying like outside of the arena. We wanted to see if we could go, I don't know, play music with them and things were all taped off. But just that whole night, and then of course, it doesn't count. LeBron, like he didn't have his best player, so the Warriors title doesn't mean anything. It's gonna make it all about LeBron. So, but at least for a few nights, it was, at least for one night, it was really, I mean, I thought it was a good chance that it was going to be the only night I would ever get to experience this, because you never know when your team is going to win a title. I mean, just ask, the Cubs fans, or ask the, Atlanta fans. I mean, have they seen any title like ever? I don't think so. I mean,
the Braves won one in the
Braves won, that's true. The Braves won one. That's right. But other than that, right? And we've been blessed. You've been really blessed being a Giants fan.
Yeah, I know.
There's nothing like the first title, and for the Warriors to win that, and to really put an end to all the like, the jump shooting teams can't win, and to really cement themselves. Again, I mean, they won 67 games that year, one of the 10 teams ever to do that. So I mean, they were already a historically great team before their 73 win year. So for them to do it the way they did, and to make so many fans in the Bay Area to make their dreams come true, was really a special thing. And again, I think anytime one of your teams like wins a title, I wanted to think about something else that there was just nothing that I could put in front of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean that's obviously that's always on the list for me. I just kind of went more the personal experience.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Did you go to any of the parades?
So I went to the first one, and then the last two I had, my summer job was starting out of town.
Okay, got it. All right. So how do we want to do? Do you want to do
so the next one? We'll do. Actually, no. It's funny. Actually, at the first parade, our other friend Jacob Hirsch, who hopefully will also have on.
Yeah.
So somehow it was me, him, and my dad, and somehow we ended up getting separated. So Jacob and my dad got separated from me, or I got separated from Jacob and my dad, and apparently Jacob almost fainted, and he got all faint, and so my dad had to like ask someone for like Gatorade, and so to like help Jacob from like passing out. But anyway, yeah.
Okay.
Fun story. But anyway, what's a bucket list item that you hope to check off one day? It can be anything as dream as big as you want.
Yeah, no, this one probably a little bit off the board. Something you probably don't know I'm interested in doing. I want to go to a professional soccer match in Europe. whether it's, Barcelona or Madrid or London or
El
something like that.
Clasico. Yeah.
Yeah, El Clasico, that'd be a great option. I want to be there for all that pageantry and just sort of the insanity of European soccer at least one time. I watch it on TV, and all the cheering and the screaming and all the traditions and the singing and the chants and all that kind of stuff. I want to be there and experience. Like, I love live sports. I mean, it's one of my favorite things in the world. And I mean, I have so many choices I could have gone with, but I feel like there's just soccer runs so deep in those countries that experiencing that in person just feels like it's hard to beat. I mean, in anything. So going to, a Man U game or a Liverpool game, or like you said, El Clasico or something like that would be, I just think would be so much fun.
Gosh, I honestly get goosebumps just thinking about it. I mean, we've seen with the MLS, they jump up and down hey, and they're like chanting and like throwing the streamers onto the field.
Right. I mean,
the soccer here is nothing like it is, obviously.
Right. I mean, in Europe, it's times 100. So.
Yeah, I know for sure.
All right.
So it's so incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
I would say if I was going to go to a European soccer match, El Clasico would probably be it.
Mm-hmm.
Probably be it for me. I mean, there's a few I've heard great things about Liverpool, about Manchester City, Man United, all those type of teams. But I think, especially because I don't know if there's documentaries about this, but there's also like the political rivalry about that. There's political implications too that I'm not that familiar with between Barcelona and Madrid. There's just so much history besides the on-field rivalry and Ronaldo and Messi and all that type of stuff.
Yeah. No, 100%.
All right. So for me,
go ahead.
It seems like you're being much more creative than me. I would love to go to an Olympics, so badly. I have a few events that I would love to go to. So I guess it's tough because Phelps and Usain Bolt are retired, but I would have loved to have seen Usain Bolt run in 100 meters. But if we're going in the future, I would love to see a gymnastics free for all. I forget what it's called. Then if I'm going to switch to the Winter Olympics, I would love to see the gold medal hockey game. The USA Canada final from 2010 is one of my favorite sports games that I've ever watched. It was just an unbelievable game. So I would say probably those two. Swimming, diving, maybe. Although I guess now basketball is going to be more competitive, so I would probably go for that. But I don't know. To me, just something about this country pride that's just very unique. Everyone loves playing for their club, but to really, I don't know, to take pride in your country. I mean, we've seen all sorts of guys who maybe have bad reputations, like Melo in the NBA. They're selfless. They put egos to the side because they understand the gravity and the weight of what playing for their country means. That they're willing to just do whatever it takes and be on their best behavior to do what's best, not for their team or partially for the team, but also for the country. And that whole concept and really seeing how it brings the best out of people in any sport is really something that I would love to go to. And I would also have to include the opening ceremonies too, which are just, maybe some people think, oh, it's kind of corny and cliche. I think they're really cool. And it's cool to see players kind of, how often you get to see that many athletes kind of in a relaxed setting, not just kind of in like a media scrum. You just kind of get to see them being themselves and genuinely hanging out. So I would say all that, I kind of listed a lot, but the Olympics in general with the few things that I listed.
Yeah, no. Watching, especially with basketball and hockey, watching guys who are on opposite teams in the NBA, on rival teams, and sort of playing together for the sake of their country. It's also really interesting. Aren't the Olympics scheduled to come to LA in 2028? Yeah. So hey,
we'll less than 10 on covering them. So.
Yeah, you only have 8 more years until you can probably make that happen if you're around at that time. So
if I'm around, I don't know. Is coronavirus going to get me? I don't know.
We'll see. Hopefully not. But I mean, maybe who knows? Maybe in 8 years it'll be like some international TV sports correspondent who gets to go to cover the Olympics. And
hey man, honestly, I would love to. I would have loved to have gone to Japan next year. And who knows? And
we'll see.
Eat a bunch of sushi and then
Hey, the world is unpredictable right now. Who knows what's going to happen?
I know.
Hold on, hope.
Is there anything else, or should we wrap it on up?
Let's wrap it up.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Thanks to Howard Beck again for joining us. Just a quick reminder again, you can follow Alex on Twitter at AlexHutton35. You can follow me at ZShuts9. That's ZSHUST9. And again, Alex, that's Alex HUTT. ON35. And then please find Lane Loops on SoundCloud. Just Lane Loops on SoundCloud. His music is fire, as I'm sure everyone has seen. So please check him out. And again, follow Howard Beck on Twitter at Howard Beck, and then check out his podcast, The Full 48. Thanks so much for listening. And then anything else, Alex? Or we're all good?
I think we're all good. Thanks for listening, like you said, and everybody take care.